The Pallava period also saw the efflorescence of a very significant type of religious edifice. The earlier edifices, obviously they were there, the structures possibly have been constructed with some perishable material. So, the architecture created during the Sangam period or the later period does not exist at all. So, we cannot know or we cannot deduce what was the nature of this architecture, but in this period, from the Pallava period onwards, we find a significant contribution being made, particularly in the religious edifices which are still there, still extant, and which actually because of their achievement still creates or still attracts our attention. It is found that during the first phase, almost all the remains, the secular remains are not there. So, we cannot deduce or we cannot understand what was the nature of this secular architecture, but the religious architecture, whatever it remains, are wholly rock cut. Either they, continuing the tradition in the Western India, are kind of excavated caves, excavated in the rock structure itself, or they are monoliths. That is, they have been created somewhat like the Ellora temple. It has been cut from a whole chunk or boulder. The rock structure has been created, that is why they are known as the monoliths. Now, during the first half of the first phase, that is the Mahendra phase, and there we find some of the cave temples at for instance Dalavanur, Tiruchinopolli, Mandakapattu and other places. Somewhere around 14 of these temples are extant or available. They have a very primitive appearance. They have a very pronounced pillar in the facade region or the facade part, and these columns, they are very primitive in their nature, without ornamentations. They are of the rail post type, constructions or compositions. Only in the by the end of the Mahendravarman period or the Mahendravarman phase, in the Bhairavakonda cave temples, we first come across the heraldic lion being part of or associated with the capital. Later all throughout the Pallava period, we find that this leonine feature, the leogryph motif, it comprises the leitmotif of the Pallava architecture. Mahabalipuram or Mamallapuram, there are both the cave structures, much more advanced, because along with the leogryph motif, other parts of the stambham, the pillar, like the tadi or palagai, they are found in the capital or the capital abacus. All the distinct parts of stambham part are found in the cave architecture, along with very exquisite sculptures being found not only in the cave temples, but also in the open air. There was particularly in the Gangavataran motif, which is also known as the Arjuna's penance motif, very near to the Mahishasura Mardini cave temple in Mamallapuram. There we find exquisite carvings or sculpture being done on the rock face. Apart from these cave temples, in the Mamalla phase, there was another very significant advancement, that is the growth of monolith structures, which is typically known by the 7 pagodas or the rathas. There are some 8 rathas, like the some of the most important rathas architecturally are Dharmaraja Ratha, then Arjuna Ratha, Draupadi Ratha, Bhima Ratha, Sahadev Ratha, like that. These rathas, barring one exception, that is of Draupadi Ratha, they belong to 2 types. One, the Vihara type, and another the Bauddha Chaitya type. In some cases, you have on the shikhara, that is the fenial part, a kind of barrel roof, and in some cases it is a pyramidal structure like the Dharmaraja Ratha. In the Draupadi Ratha, it is the Alpavimanam, that is the most simple structure, built in such a manner which represents, which imitates the thatched roof. With these features, the Mamalla phase, it shows a kind of development, but what for? These temples were being built or the structures were being built has remained a kind of a paradox, because all these 7 pagodas, they were never used for a religious purpose, they were never complete even, and in Mahabalipuram some of the structures, they have been left incomplete. This poses some very tricky historical questions or some paradoxes which has not yet been solved. during the Rajsimha phase, two most important or significant remains are, one, the shore temple on the built on the very foreshore of Mahabalipuram, and the Kailashnath temple in Kanchi. The shore temple, it is actually the amalgamation of three shrines. The tallest one, nearest to the sea, it has a spire, and then there is another shrine adjacent to it, and finally there is another one on the west side, there is another one. When we come to the Kailashnath temple, we find the features that we find in the shore temple, the typical features of the Shadavarga temple are all available there, though the Vimanam part is separate. Then we have an Antaral, possibly built somewhat later, then a Mukha Mandapa, followed by the entrance, the kernel of the future Gopuram, which comprises or which constitutes the most significant part of the South Indian temple architecture in the later period, particularly during the Vijayanagara period. The last one, the last structural temple important from the development of Pallava architectural style is the Vaikuntha Perumal temple, built later during the period of Nandivarman the second Pallava Malla. And there, unlike the Kailashnath temple, where the Vimana, Antaral, Mukhamandapa, they are separate, or they are separate entities. In the Vaikuntha Perumal temple, all these three features have been brought together within the single roof and in a structure in which these features cannot be differentiated. Again, there is a huge or heavy embellishment of the sculptural motifs, which becomes a very important part of the South Indian temple architecture from this time onwards. The Pallava architectural style, it is, or the importance of the Pallava architectural style is lies here, that in the pan-Indian scene we find three types of temple architecture or temple architectural styles evolving. In the North India, it is the Nagara style, though there are regional variations of the Nagara style, which differs very much from Gujarat to Odisha. Then in the mid region, we find a mixed architecture, which grew up under the patronage of the Vatapi Chalukyas, that is known as the Vesra or mixed architectural style. And in the lower Dravida Desha, we find the development of the typical quintessential Dravidian architecture known as the Dravida style. This Dravida style developed through phases. The first phase may be considered as the Pallava phase, which was subsequently taken up by the Cholas, then the Pandyans, and finally the Vijayanagara kings, later which had the developments during the Madurai Nayakas. Also there were significant changes. The Pallava period, which was the earliest, had the genesis of this South Indian architectural style, and it was also very significant in its achievements. Barring a few like the Kailashnath or Vaikuntha Perumal temple. None of them they were very monumental in their size, but the size as well as the sculptural representations, they find a very fine balance, a kind of unison which produces a tremendous effect, which is still available to any of the viewers who go to see any of these extant Pallava temple architectures. The Vatapi Chalukyans occupied a portion which some of the art historians consider as the upper Dravida Desha, and a peculiar manifestation of their architectural style is an amalgamation of the northern and the southern Dravidian style, which is the signature of their architectural genius. How it evolved, it is not very well known, because the precedents or the antecedents of the Chalukyan architecture has not yet been found, or they are not very ample evidences of the antecedents of Vatapi Chalukyan architecture. The Vakatakas, they have not yet left or we have not yet found enormous amount of their architectural remains. So, what was the precedent or antecedent, it is not very clear, and the region where the Chalukyans started their temple architecture, it did not have that kind of tradition. So, we cannot say with what materials they started developing their architectural genius. The extant examples of Vatapi Chalukyan architecture can be found at different places, particularly in Vatapi, which was their capital. Near Vatapi in Aihole, there are some very important examples of Chalukyan architecture, as well as Pattadakkal, which is on the Malaprava river, and also in Alampur, which is in the eastern part of Deccan, that is presently in Andhra Pradesh. These areas saw development of Chalukyan architecture in different phases. The earliest beginning was obviously the cave architecture or the cave temples, either Brahminical or Jain, and sometimes there are remnants of the Buddhist caves as well. Among the 4 Vatapi cave temples, 3 are Brahminical and another is Jain temple. Among the 4, 1 and 3, on the basis of the foundation inscription, has been ascribed to Kirtivarman Mangalesha, particularly Mangalesha, that is the mid 6th century. And the the largest one, cave number 3, it is dedicated to Vishnu. It has at the very gate, it has a wonderful depiction of the cosmic dance, and the 4th one, it is Jaina temple. Now, the 3 temples, the royal temples, the second one, it was excavated possibly during second Pulakeshi's time, and his queen Durbala Devi may be instrumental in excavating that one. The 3 caves, they are royal caves and has the royal pretensions also. They are much larger compared to the 4th one, which was possibly either excavated at the instance of one Jain preceptor or some patron, some merchant patron of the Jains. Possibly later, even at the time of Mangalesha itself, the structural temples started coming up. Now, in Vatapi, temples like in Vatapi as well as Aihole, in Aihole particularly, we have examples of for instance, the Durga Temple and the Lad Khan Temple. Now, Durga Temple, it is very peculiar in the sense that it is an apsidal temple in the sense that it resembles the apse of a Buddhist chaitya, the cave chaityas, but it has a circumambulatory path and it is open circumambulatory, it is not guarded by a wall, just pillars hold the roof, and these niches, the niche of the inner wall of the circumambulatory path has some of the finest examples of the Vatapi Chalukyan architecture. But unlike the other apsidal temples which have a barrel roof, this one has a shikhara. This is very interesting, very uncommon among the apsidal temples, and this shikhara is made in the northern temple architectural style with alternating gavakshas and other architectural styles being assembling this northern style shikhara. The Lad Khan temple, the plan is very simple with only a square inner chamber, Garbhagriha, without any circumambulatory path, because it is situated on the wall of the back side. The sacred chamber is situated on the back side of the wall. But very interesting is the roof, because it resembles, though it is made of stone, it closely resembles the logs, wooden logs, which was earlier, possibly earlier used for making this type of architectures. Later, the Vatapi Chalukyan kings, they shifted their temple building activities to Alampur, and there are 9 temples which is together known as Navabrahma, of which Svarga Brahma is the largest and the finest one, which was built by Vinayavati, who was the queen of Vinayaditya. Later, with Vikramaditya II coming to the throne and defeating the Pallava king time and again, and once he actually conquered Kanchi itself, it is said that he was enamored by Kailashnath temple, and his two queens, one Loka Mahadevi and another Triloka Mahadevi, who was actually the sister of Loka Mahadevi, they built two temples, and this time the temple activities were not taking place either in Vatapi, Aihole or Alampur. It was taking place in Pattadakkal. In Pattadakkal, we find a close amalgamation of these temples at a very small place. And in Pattadakkal, the Virupaksha temple, which is the largest one, it is made in the Deccan style, and very close to it, the Mallikarjuna temple, which was built by Triloka Mahadevi, it also resembles the Deccan the Dravidian style of architecture, where in the typical Dravidian format there is the pyramidal shape of Vimana which is coming up. Taking all these things together, we find that in the Chalukyan period they could build a distinct style of architecture of their own, and this style of architecture has a peculiar blend of northern and the southern style of architecture, and that is the reason why one of the very important art historians considers that this is because the region where they were dominating, it was a kind of cultural magnet, and situated on the borderlines of northern India and southern India, it could very well amalgamate the architectural styles of the two.